West Hollywood was unusually quiet that evening. The late sun spilled gold across the narrow street outside Vanessa Moore's apartment, and for a moment she felt grateful for the silence. She had been working long hours at the design studio and treasured the rare peace when she could drop her bag by the door, slip off her shoes, and breathe without obligation. But just as she was reaching for a glass of water, the doorbell rang. The sharp, intrusive sound made her wince. Vanessa never liked unexpected visits. Her closest friends knew better than to arrive unannounced. She hesitated, staring at the door as though silence might send whoever it was away. But the bell rang again, longer this time. With a sigh, she walked toward it, her steps slow, cautious. Peering through the peephole, her breath caught in her throat. Jason Hull. It had been years since she had seen him, years since she had forced herself to lock away every memory. Yet there he was, standing on the front step with a bouquet of red roses, so large it nearly obscured his face. He looked older, the sharp edges of his jawline softened by fatigue, but his smile, crooked, practiced, remained the same. "Vanessa!" he called softly, his voice muffled through the door. "Please open up. I just want to talk." Her first instinct was to step back, to retreat into the kitchen, and wait until he left. But Jason was relentless. The bell rang again, loud and insistent, and she knew that if the neighbors peeked out, he would charm them with some story about being her fiancé, about a lover's quarrel soon to be forgiven. The thought made her stomach turn. With a sharp motion, she unlocked the door and swung it open. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice colder than she intended. Jason's grin faltered, but quickly reappeared. He thrust the roses toward her, practically forcing them into her hands as he stepped over the threshold without waiting for an invitation. The scent of the flowers filled the entryway, cloying, suffocating. "Look at you," he said softly, as though nothing had happened. You look incredible." Vanessa set the bouquet down on the counter with a thud. "You shouldn't be here, Jason. You made your choice years ago." His expression shifted, the practiced charm giving way to a flicker of regret. "Vanessa, don't be like that. I was young. I didn't know what I was doing." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "You didn't know what you were doing? You left me for Sophia Blake. You walked away to marry the daughter of a producer because it promised you a career. Don't stand here pretending it was anything else." Jason's shoulders sagged. "It wasn't just me. My parents pushed me. They said it was the only way forward. You know how fragile my mother's health was back then. If I'd gone against them, it would have broken her. My father would have disowned me. What was I supposed to do?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "So you expect me to forgive you because your family made you betray me? You expect me to forget the way you humiliated me, throwing me aside like I was nothing?" His lips parted, but no words came. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the hum of traffic on Santa Monica Boulevard in the distance. Finally, Jason sighed and dropped his gaze. "Maybe I don't deserve forgiveness," he admitted, "but I had to see you again. Just once." Vanessa folded her arms across her chest, every muscle taut. "You've seen me. Now leave." He moved toward the door, then paused, as if remembering something. From behind his back, he lifted a sleek black briefcase. It looked expensive, the kind of case lawyers or financiers carried, and oddly heavy in his hands. "Before I go," he said quietly, "I need to ask you a favor." Vanessa's brow furrowed. "What now?" "This case," he explained, holding it out. "It's just documents. Work papers. I can't carry it around right now. I've got too much going on, too many errands across the city. Would you mind holding on to it for me? Just for a few days. I'll come back for it before I leave town." Her instinct screamed no. She didn't want anything of his in her apartment, not even a trace of his presence. "Why can't you leave it with a friend? Or put it in storage?" "I don't have anyone else here," Jason said quickly, almost desperately. "My parents moved back east. and I can't trust anyone else with this. Please, Vanessa. I wouldn't ask if it weren't important." She studied him, searching for a lie in his face. His eyes looked tired, almost haunted, and though she hated herself for it, a flicker of pity stirred inside her. Against her better judgment, she nodded once. "Fine, but don't expect me to be responsible for it. I'll keep it here, but that's all." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you. Truly. I'll be back soon to pick it up." He set the briefcase down by the door and straightened his jacket. For a fleeting second, he seemed like the Jason she had once known, confident, charming, full of possibility. But the memory passed quickly, replaced by the man who had walked away without hesitation. "Goodbye, Vanessa," he murmured, stepping out into the fading light. She closed the door firmly behind him, her hand lingering on the knob. The apartment felt different now, the air heavy with ghosts of the past. Her eyes drifted to the briefcase resting against the wall, silent and unassuming, yet somehow ominous. Vanessa turned away, determined not to think about it. But deep down, she knew this simple act of pity would mark the beginning of something she could never have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Jason Hall never returned to Vanessa's apartment. He didn't call, didn't send an email, didn't even attempt to check in. It was as if he had vanished from Los Angeles entirely, swallowed by the city's endless sprawl of lights and shadows. At first, Vanessa expected some sign. She thought he might show up the next evening, or the next week at the latest. But the silence stretched on, and soon the memory of his sudden visit faded into the background noise of her busy life. She buried herself in work at the design studio, taking on extra projects, late-night deadlines, anything to keep her mind occupied. The roses he had brought wilted quickly, their petals crumbling in the trash. Only the briefcase remained, tucked neatly in the corner of her living room. She rarely looked at it. It was just another object cluttering her space, one she intended to return as soon as Jason came back. But Jason never did. By the time summer rolled into fall, the case had gathered a thin layer of dust. Vanessa had shoved it into the closet behind old coats and boxes of forgotten files. She told herself she would deal with it eventually, but for now, she needed the mental distance. Out of sight, out of mind. Then came the day of her seasonal cleaning. The California heat had finally lifted, and she opened her windows wide to let in the cool breeze drifting down from the Hollywood hills. She played music, rolled up her sleeves, and tackled the corners of her apartment she usually ignored. It felt good, in a way, restoring order, taking control of her small world. In the back of her closet, beneath a stack of rarely worn sweaters, her hand brushed against the smooth leather surface. She froze. For a moment, she didn't recognize it. Then, with a chill, she pulled it into the light. The briefcase. Jason's briefcase. Her pulse quickened. She stared at it as if it might open on its own, reveal whatever secrets it contained. Months had passed, and yet here it was, heavy, unclaimed, unwanted. Vanessa set it down on the floor. She crouched in front of it, her fingers running across the cool metal locks. She tried the clasps once, then again, but they held firm. No combination dial, just sleek latches sealed by some mechanism she couldn't budge. She pressed harder, frustrated, until her hands ached. Nothing. She sat back on her heels, chewing the inside of her cheek. What was she supposed to do with this thing? One part of her wanted to drag it straight to the dumpster in the alley, to rid herself of whatever invisible thread tied her to Jason's unfinished business. Another part whispered that it could contain something valuable, important documents, maybe even money. And yet another voice warned her. If she opened it, she might find something she could never unsee. Report it to the police? The thought crossed her mind. But what would she say? That her ex-fiancé, the man who had abandoned her for a life of wealth and power, showed up out of nowhere with a mysterious case and then disappeared? They would pepper her with questions she couldn't answer. Worse, They might suspect her of being involved. She sighed, pressing her palms against her eyes. It was ridiculous. It was just a briefcase. And yet it sat there like a weight, a dark reminder of choices she hadn't made but still had to carry. Vanessa stood, slid the case back into the closet, and pushed it as far as it would go. She stacked boxes on top of it, buried it beneath winter coats, and shut the door firmly. There, she muttered to herself. Gone. But it wasn't gone. Even with the closet closed, she could feel its presence. A faint unease lingered, like the hum of a low note that never resolved. She told herself it was nonsense. Just nerves, the aftertaste of old betrayal. Still, as she moved through her apartment that night, turning off lights one by one, she couldn't shake the image of the case waiting silently in the dark. Vanessa crawled into bed, pulled the covers tight around her, and stared at the ceiling. She tried to think about work, about deadlines and pitches, about the life she had carefully built for herself. But her mind kept circling back to the closet, to the hidden object pressing against her thoughts like a splinter she couldn't remove. Eventually, she closed her eyes, whispering into the empty room, "It's nothing. Just let it go." But deep down, she knew she hadn't let it go at all. Months passed, and life pressed on as if Jason Hall had never appeared on her doorstep. Vanessa more buried herself in projects at the studio, took on late nights with colleagues, and filled her weekends with errands that left no time for reflection. Yet, no matter how busy she kept herself, the memory of the briefcase lingered in the back of her mind, silent and heavy, hidden deep inside her closet. It was during a business trip downtown, on a crisp November morning, that the ghost of Jason returned to her thoughts in a tangible way. Vanessa was scheduled to meet a client near the financial district, and after the meeting, she found herself wandering down familiar streets. The energy of downtown Los Angeles always felt different from West Hollywood, harsher, faster, layered with ambition and desperation. At a cafe near Pershing Square, she spotted someone she hadn't seen in years, an old acquaintance who had once moved in the same social circles as Jason and Sophia Blake. They exchanged polite greetings, and then, almost against her will, Vanessa asked, "Have you heard anything about Jason Hall?" The woman gave her a startled look, then lowered her voice. "Jason? Oh, Vanessa, you didn't know." A cold weight settled in Vanessa's stomach. Didn't know what? "He's dead. It happened months ago. He got involved with the wrong people. Financial schemes, shady deals, I don't know all the details. But it ended badly. Very badly." The words landed like stones. Dead. She should have felt nothing for him. Not after everything. But shock rippled through her all the same. "And Sophia?" Vanessa pressed her throat tight. The woman leaned back, shaking her head. She didn't waste time. Left him before things collapsed. Married some European investor, I think German. Sold their house in the hills, took the money, and left the country. She put her mother in a nursing home and never looked back. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the clink of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine. Vanessa forced a smile, thanked the woman, and excused herself. Outside, the downtown streets buzzed with traffic and chatter, but Vanessa felt strangely detached, as though walking through a film where the sound had been muted. Jason dead, Sophia gone. Only the mother remained, tucked away in some facility abandoned to time. The next day, curiosity, or perhaps conscience, drew Vanessa to the address she'd been given, a nursing home on the east side of the city. The building was clean, but carried the faint smell of antiseptic and old age. Nurses moved quietly through the halls, and muted televisions played game shows to residents who barely looked up. Sophia's mother sat near a window, her frame frail, her eyes clouded with both age and resignation. When Vanessa introduced herself, the older woman's lips trembled in recognition of the name Jason. "You were the other one," she murmured. "The girl before Sophia." Vanessa nodded softly, not denying it. The old woman's voice was unsteady, but her words carried the sharpness of truth. She spoke of Jason's downfall, how he had reached too high, too fast, entangling himself with financial predators who didn't forgive mistakes. He thought he was clever, she whispered. But clever doesn't save you when the money belongs to men who kill without blinking. They found him. They ended it. That's what happens when you betray trust in their world. Vanessa listened, her chest tight. She asked gently about Sophia, but the woman only sighed. My daughter sold the house, left me here, and vanished. I haven't heard from her since. She has her own life now. I suppose I am no longer part of it. There was no bitterness in the woman's tone, just a weary acceptance that cut deeper than anger. When Vanessa finally left the nursing home, the sun was sinking low, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The city felt heavier than usual, each street corner whispering secrets she didn't want to hear. Jason was gone, his glamorous marriage had disintegrated, and Sophia had fled. All that remained of their once perfect facade was an abandoned mother and a legacy of ruin. As she drove back toward West Hollywood, the image of the briefcase returned to her mind with startling clarity. The explanation was simple now. Jason had been running from something far more dangerous than his own regrets. Whatever was inside that case had likely been the very thing that sealed his fate. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. She had told herself for months it was nothing. Just papers, just clutter. But now she knew better. That case wasn't just a burden. It was a threat, one she had been living with, unknowingly all this time. By the time she parked outside her apartment, night had fallen, and a chill settled over her skin despite the mild California air. She glanced up at the window of her unit, her chest rising with uneasy breaths. The case was still there, waiting in her closet, patient and silent. Vanessa locked the car, climbed the stairs, and fumbled with her keys. Inside, the apartment felt unchanged, but her perception of it had shifted entirely. Every shadow seemed darker, every creak of the floor more sinister. She dropped her purse on the counter, walked straight to the closet, and pressed her hand against the door. Behind it sat the briefcase, its secrets untouched, its locks still unyielding. For the first time, Vanessa admitted to herself that she was afraid, not of Jason, not of the past, but of the dangerous future the briefcase carried with it. Back at her apartment, Vanessa Moore could no longer avoid the decision she had been postponing for months. The nursing home visit had unsettled her, left her with a truth she could not ignore. Jason Hall hadn't just disappeared. He had been destroyed by whatever shadowy world he had stepped into. And now that shadow lingered in her closet, sealed inside a black briefcase that refused to be forgotten. That evening she pulled it out, brushing away a thin film of dust. She dragged it into the center of her living room and sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at it as if her gaze alone might unlock its secrets. For a long while she did nothing, only listened to the faint hum of traffic outside her window, the muffled laughter of neighbors passing in the hallway. Life carried on outside, but inside her apartment time seemed to hold its breath. Her fingers tightened around the handle. Enough, she whispered to herself. She remembered the old rotary tool she had bought on a whim during a home improvement sale. It had sat unused in her storage cabinet for years, but tonight she fetched it with trembling hands. She fitted a cutting disc, plugged it in, and crouched over the briefcase. When she pressed the trigger, the machine roared to life, shrill and unforgiving. Sparks leapt as the blade bit into the polished metal locks. The acrid smell of scorched steel filled the room. Vanessa flinched at every crackle, half expecting the neighbors to bang on her door, but no one came. Slowly, grudgingly, the first lock gave way, then the second. When the final latch snapped, silence rushed in, deafening after the relentless grind of the tool. Vanessa shut it off, her chest heaving. For a moment, she couldn't bring herself to lift the lid. Her palms were slick with sweat, her heart hammering so loudly it seemed to echo off the walls. Finally, with a sharp breath, she pushed it open. Inside, neatly stacked from edge to edge, were bricks of US dollars, bundles upon bundles, held tight with bank straps, filling the case so completely it was a wonder Jason had carried it at all. Vanessa's eyes widened, her vision swimming. She reached out instinctively, her fingertips brushing the rough paper edges of the money. It felt real. Too real. The shock hit her like a tidal wave. There was no mistaking it now. This was why Jason had been killed. Not for betrayal alone. Not for poor business choices. But for this, money stolen or hidden. Money that belonged to someone powerful enough to erase him from the earth without consequence. Vanessa jerked her hand back as though burned. The briefcase remained open, exposing its obscene wealth like a wound. Her mind spiraled. What was she supposed to do with this? Call the police? She imagined walking into a precinct, setting the case on a desk, and explaining that her long-absent ex-fiancé had dropped it off months ago and never returned. The officers would ask why she hadn't reported it sooner. They would suspect her, interrogate her, maybe even charge her as an accomplice. And even if she convinced them of her innocence, could she trust them not to take the money for themselves, or worse, hand her name over to the very criminals who wanted it back? The thought chilled her. What if she kept it? She pictured herself paying off debts, moving to a better apartment, starting over with security she had never known. But the fantasy soured almost instantly. Money like this wasn't a gift, it was a curse. Whoever it belonged to would come looking. And if they found her with it, she wouldn't survive long enough to spend a single bill. She pressed her hands to her face, rocking slightly. Every option seemed like a trap. Throw it in the dumpster. Someone else would find it, and the trail might still lead back to her. Burn it? Impossible, there was too much. And besides, destroying that much cash might draw as much attention as keeping it. The walls of her apartment felt closer now, the air heavy with menace. She snapped the case shut and shoved it across the floor, but that did nothing to ease the weight in her chest. It was still there, crouched in the corner like a predator, silent but alive. Vanessa curled up on the couch, knees to her chest, staring into the dim light of her apartment. Sleep was out of the question. Her mind replayed the words of Sophia's mother, the warning in her weary eyes. Men who kill without blinking. She shivered. From this night forward, the briefcase was no longer just an object tucked away in her closet. It was a presence, an invisible hand pressing down on her shoulders. Every sound outside her window, the squeal of brakes, the slam of a door, made her tense. Every knock in the hallway set her heart racing. She was caught in something she hadn't chosen, yet couldn't escape. And she knew with sickening clarity that the longer the money stayed in her possession, the closer danger would creep. The obsession had begun. It was a Thursday evening when Vanessa stopped at the neighborhood supermarket on her way home from work. The aisles were crowded with people rushing to grab groceries before dinner, carts clattering, checkout lines stretching long. Vanessa kept her list short, just milk, bread, a few vegetables, wanting nothing more than to get home and shut out the world. By the time she exited the sliding glass doors, the sun had dipped low, leaving the parking lot bathed in the gray wash of street lamps. She tucked her phone into her hand to call a rideshare. Her shopping bag looped over her arm. That was when it happened. A blur of motion swept past her shoulder. Fingers ripped her phone from her hand. And before she could even gasp, the thief was sprinting into the crowd, weaving between parked cars. Vanessa froze. Her heart pounded, her throat locked in shock. Then another figure moved, fast, decisive. A tall man in a leather jacket bolted after the thief, his footsteps pounding against the pavement. He caught up in seconds, seizing the young man by the collar and twisting his arm until the phone slipped free. The thief cursed, wrenched himself loose, and vanished into the shadows, but the phone was safe. The man turned, breathless but smiling, and extended it toward her. "This yours?" Vanessa's voice trembled. "Yes. Oh my God, thank you." He chuckled, his smile easy, disarming. You should hold on to it a little tighter next time. This city doesn't forgive carelessness." She nodded, still shaken, her fingers closing around the familiar weight of her phone. "I don't even know how to thank you." "Well," he said with a playful tilt of his head, "how about a cup of coffee? There's a cafe just down the block. My treat." Vanessa hesitated. Her instinct was always to pull back, to retreat from strangers. But something about him, the steadiness in his gaze, the calm in his voice, made her pause. For the first time in a long while, she felt the edges of her guarded world soften. "All right," she said quietly. They walked together down the street, the city humming around them. The cafe was small, warm, lit by hanging bulbs and filled with the scent of roasted beans. He guided her to a table near the window, then went to order. When he returned, he carried not only 2 steaming cups, but also a plate with pastries and sandwiches. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said, setting the tray down, "so I guessed. Hope that's okay." Vanessa couldn't help a smile. "You really didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he replied simply. "After all, I crashed your evening." He extended his hand across the table. "Chris Walker." She took it, feeling the warmth of his palm, the firmness of his grip. "Vanessa." They began to talk. At first it was polite, where they lived what they did for work. But quickly the conversation deepened. Chris was easy to listen to, his story simple but honest. He spoke about moving to Los Angeles after a failed marriage, about working in logistics for a friend's company, about starting over. Vanessa found herself sharing more than she intended. Her work as a designer, her love for the city despite its chaos, her loneliness that she rarely admitted aloud. She surprised herself with how freely the words came. Time slipped by. The coffee cooled, the plate emptied, yet neither seemed in a rush to leave. Chris's laughter was genuine, his attention unwavering. He asked about her life, not with idle curiosity, but with a sincerity that made her feel seen. As they stepped back outside, the night air was cooler, the city lights blinking in the distance. Chris walked her to her apartment building, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "I don't want to intrude," he said at the steps, "but I'd like to see you again, if you'd let me." Vanessa hesitated. She had built walls around her heart, high and strong. But tonight, something cracked. For the first time in years, she felt a flutter she couldn't ignore. She gave a small nod. "I think I'd like that." Chris's smile widened. "Then it's a promise." He didn't push for more. No attempt at a kiss, no insistence on coming inside. Just a respectful goodnight, a lingering glance that held more meaning than words. When Vanessa closed her door behind her, she leaned against it. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from something else. Something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. Upstairs in her closet, the briefcase still sat where she had hidden it, silent and ominous. But for tonight, Vanessa allowed herself to think of something different, someone different. Chris Walker had stepped into her life unexpectedly, and with him came a flicker of light in the darkness. The days that followed were unlike anything Vanessa Moore had experienced in years. Chris Walker became a steady presence in her life, calling, texting, meeting her after work. What began as a single cup of coffee turned into dinners, movie nights, long walks along the Santa Monica Pier. He never rushed her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. Yet his presence had a way of dissolving the walls she had built around her heart. He was attentive in the smallest ways. When she mentioned once that she hated mornings without coffee, he appeared at her office the next day with her favorite order in hand. When her car battery died, he was there within minutes, tools already in his trunk. He remembered details others always forgot, her favorite band from high school, the book she reread every winter, even the way she preferred her sandwiches cut diagonally. For Vanessa, who had spent years bracing against disappointment, it felt disarming. With Chris, she didn't feel the need to guard every word or check every expression. She began to laugh more freely, to imagine a life where loneliness wasn't her default companion. Weeks turned into months, and their relationship deepened. They explored farmers' markets together, cooked clumsy dinners that ended in laughter, and spent rainy afternoons curled on the couch, sharing stories that stretched late into the night. Slowly, carefully, Chris made her believe in love again. One evening, after a long day at the studio, Vanessa arrived home to find Chris waiting in her living room. He had cooked dinner, pasta, slightly overcooked, but made with an effort that touched her. Afterward, as she rose to clear the plates, he stopped her. "Wait," he said softly. Vanessa turned, puzzled. That was when she noticed the small red velvet box in his hand. Her breath caught. Chris knelt on one knee, his eyes steady, his voice low but sure. "Vanessa Moore, you've changed my life in ways I didn't know were possible. I don't want another day to pass without you knowing how much I love you. Will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. Her chest tightened, and tears blurred her vision. She hadn't expected this, not so soon, not so perfectly, and yet everything inside her screamed yes. She pressed her hands to her face, overcome. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, trembling. "Yes, Chris." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she laughed through her tears, collapsing into his arms. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that happiness could be hers. But later that night, when Chris had gone and the apartment was quiet again, Vanessa's gaze drifted toward the closet. Behind the closed door, beneath boxes and coats, the briefcase waited. The sight of the diamond glinting on her hand only sharpened the gnawing unease in her stomach. She had not told him. Not about Jason's visit. Not about the briefcase. Not about the stacks of money sealed inside. Money that had already cost one man his life. Every time she tried to imagine the conversation, her throat tightened. How could she explain? "Chris, the man who once betrayed me, showed up with a mysterious case. I kept it, opened it, and found more cash than I could count. He was killed for it, and now it's in my closet." The words sounded absurd, damning, impossible to speak aloud. And yet, keeping it hidden was worse. She had accepted his ring, accepted his promise of a shared future, while carrying a secret that could destroy them both. Vanessa paced the apartment, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Her reflection in the window looked foreign, hopeful, and terrified all at once. She touched the ring again, her chest aching with guilt. "I'll tell him tomorrow," she thought. Tomorrow after work. No more waiting. She clung to that decision as if it were a lifeline. She would confess everything, lay the truth bare, and trust that Chris's love was strong enough to withstand it. But as she turned out the lights and slipped into bed, the shadow of the briefcase seemed to grow larger in her mind, pressing against her dreams. For now, she allowed herself one more night of peace, one more night of believing that love alone could be enough. Tomorrow the truth would come. The day had been long, but ordinary. Vanessa Moore left the studio just after sunset, her bag heavy with sketches and deadlines, her mind lingering on the promise she had made to herself the night before. She would tell Chris everything. The truth about Jason, the briefcase, the money. Tonight, after dinner, she would finally confess. She rehearsed the words in her head as she drove, nervously twisting the ring on her finger. She imagined Chris listening with patience, imagined him taking her hands and reassuring her that they would face the storm together. The thought gave her courage, made her steps lighter as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. But the moment she slid the key into the lock, something felt wrong. The door resisted, as though it had been slammed shut without care. When it opened, the air inside carried a sharp edge, the scent of dust and disarray. Vanessa froze in the doorway. Her living room had been torn apart. Cushions lay scattered on the floor, books thrown from the shelves, drawers yanked open and emptied. Lamps were overturned, their shades dented and crooked. It looked less like a burglary and more like a storm had ripped through her home. Her pulse spiked as she dropped her bag and stumbled forward, calling out instinctively, "Chris!" No answer. She rushed to the closet, her chest heaving. She flung open the door, shoved aside the coats and boxes, and felt her stomach drop into a bottomless pit. The briefcase was gone. Her knees weakened, her hand gripping the closet doorframe for support. For a moment, her mind refused to accept it. Maybe she had moved it, maybe she had hidden it somewhere else. But the truth was undeniable. The case with all its secrets had vanished. Shaking, she turned back toward the living room. That was when she saw it. A sheet of paper resting neatly on the coffee table amidst the chaos. Unlike everything else in the apartment, it hadn't been touched or disturbed. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The handwriting was unmistakably his. My dearest Vanessa, forgive me for the deception. The money was never yours to keep. It belonged to people who would never have left you in peace. I returned it to them. I promised them you never touched a single bill. You are safe now. Please believe me when I say I love you. I never lied about that. I'll explain everything soon. Yours always, Chris. The paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. Vanessa staggered back, her chest constricting as though the walls were collapsing around her. Safe? He thought she was safe now. He had taken the money, taken the one secret she had carried alone for months, and decided for her, without a word, without a choice. Her mind spun. Had he been working for them all along? Had every smile, every kiss, every whispered word of love been part of the plan to get close enough to find the case to take it? The room blurred through a haze of tears. She pressed her palms to her face, trying to block out the images, the memories of him kneeling with a ring, of his hand in hers at the cafe, of his laughter echoing in the quiet of her apartment. All of it tainted now. She sank to the floor, the overturned lamp beside her casting skewed shadows across the walls. A sob tore from her throat, raw and uncontrollable. This was worse than Jason's betrayal. Jason had chosen power, status, another woman. But Chris had pretended to love her, had wormed his way into her trust, only to rob her of the one secret that haunted her life. The diamond ring glittered cruelly on her finger. She yanked at it, nearly flinging it across the room, but stopped herself. The weight of it remained heavy with mockery. Alone in the wreckage of her home, Vanessa felt something inside her fracture. She had believed again, allowed herself to hope, only to discover she had been a pawn once more. Her sobs quieted into hollow silence. Around her, the apartment lay broken, every overturned object a reminder of her naivete. She wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking gently, whispering into the emptiness. Why did I believe? Outside, Los Angeles pulsed with indifferent life. Cars rushing, voices echoing in the night. But inside Vanessa's apartment, the world had collapsed into grief. She had lost the money. She had lost her trust. And worst of all, she had lost the love she thought she had finally found. The pain was doubled now. Betrayal upon betrayal, wound upon wound. Vanessa sat frozen on the floor, the letter beside her, the truth crushing her like a weight she might never escape. 3 days passed in silence. Vanessa more moved through them like a ghost, going to work and returning to her shattered apartment, but nothing felt real. She avoided calls from friends, ignored emails piling in her inbox, and left the letter Chris had written folded on the coffee table where she had first found it. Every time she glanced at it, her chest tightened with equal parts rage and grief. On the 4th evening, just as she was preparing to shut herself inside again, the doorbell rang. The sound froze her in place. She stared at the door, dread and longing wrestling inside her. "Vanessa!" came the voice she had both hated and craved. Chris Walker. Her hands curled into fists. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. He stood there, weary and unshaven, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Please," he said softly, "just let me explain." She stepped aside without a word, her silence colder than any refusal. Chris entered, glancing at the wreckage still lingering from the break-in. The overturned lamp, the drawers never quite put back. He turned toward her, his expression heavy. "I know what you think of me," he began. "That I used you. That everything we had was just an act to get the money. But that's not the truth." Vanessa's laugh was brittle. "Isn't it? You walked into my life, made me believe again, and then you took the one thing that's haunted me for months. You left me a letter like that was supposed to make it better." "I had no choice," Chris said, his voice breaking. "When I first met you, it wasn't by chance. I was sent. I owed people money, Vanessa, dangerous people. They told me if I didn't track down Jason Hall's briefcase, I was finished. At first, yes, I agreed because I was desperate. But the second I saw you," he paused, swallowing hard, "I fell in love with you. That wasn't part of the plan. That was real." Vanessa folded her arms, trembling. "You expect me to believe that? That it was just coincidence you rescued me that night at the supermarket?" He shook his head. "No, that was staged. I asked a guy I knew to snatch your phone so I'd have an excuse to step in. I hated myself for it even then. But when I saw the fear in your eyes when I handed your phone back, I swear to you something changed. It wasn't a job anymore. You weren't a job." Her throat constricted, torn between fury and a desperate hope that he wasn't lying. "I tried to tell you," Chris went on. "So many times I wanted to. But how could I? How could I look at you, the woman I love, and admit that I came into your life under false pretenses? That the people I worked for would have killed you if they thought you were standing in the way? I thought if I just kept you safe, if I handled it quietly, maybe you'd never have to know." Vanessa's eyes burned with tears. "Safe? You call this safe? My apartment ransacked, my life torn apart, because of you, because of that damn case." He took a step closer, voice urgent. "I gave the money back. Every cent. I made them swear to leave you alone. I told them you never touched it, never knew. I walked away with nothing. No payoff, no reward. Just you. That's all I want. You." The sincerity in his eyes unsettled her more than his lies. She wanted to scream, to push him out, to never see him again. Yet some stubborn part of her ached to believe him. "You betrayed me," she whispered. "You lied from the very beginning." I did," Chris admitted, "and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But everything after, that was real. Every word, every touch, every moment. I love you, Vanessa. I would risk anything to prove it." She shook her head, backing away until her shoulders hit the wall. Her heart thundered painfully, split between love and rage. "I don't know if I can believe you. I don't know if I can ever forgive this." Chris's expression was raw, unguarded. "I'll wait. If it takes days, weeks, years, I'll wait for you to decide. Just don't shut the door completely. Please." The room fell silent. Vanessa's breath came uneven, her gaze fixed on him. She wanted to believe, wanted to let the warmth of his words mend what had been broken. But the wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. Finally, she turned her face away. "Go, Chris. I need time. I need space. Right now, I can't do this." His shoulders sagged, but he nodded. He stepped toward the door, pausing only once to look back. "I'll come if you call," he said quietly. Then he left, the door closing behind him with a hollow click. Vanessa sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her heart waged a war she couldn't end. Love and betrayal, trust and doubt, tangled until she no longer knew which was stronger. And in that moment, she understood the cruelest truth of all. Sometimes the deepest wounds are carved not by enemies, but by those who claim to love us most. The silence in Vanessa Moore's apartment stretched long after Chris Walker's words faded. He stood near the door, his posture uncharacteristically uncertain, waiting for something she could not give. Her chest ached, torn between the desire to believe and the instinct to protect what little was left of her trust. "Chris," she said finally, her voice low but steady, I can't forgive you. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. What you did, how you came into my life, it broke something in me. If I'm honest, I don't even know if it can be repaired." He flinched as if struck, but he didn't argue. He didn't beg. Instead, he simply nodded, his expression raw with regret. "I understand," he murmured. "Go," she whispered, her throat tight. "Just go. Give me time. If what you feel is real, you'll give me that." For a moment, he stood frozen, as though reluctant to let the space between them close forever. Then, slowly, he turned the knob and stepped out into the hallway. The door closed with a muted click, leaving Vanessa alone in the dim glow of her living room. The quiet pressed heavily around her. She collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling as though she had just run miles. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, and her mind replayed every moment of the past months. Jason at her door, the weight of the briefcase, the stacks of money, Chris's laughter in the cafe, his proposal, the wreckage of her apartment, the letter on the table. It was all one tangled knot, impossible to unravel. She pressed her palms against her eyes, whispering to herself, it wasn't just him. It was me too. The admission startled her. For months, she had carried the briefcase in silence, hiding it even from the man she claimed to love. She had chosen to bury the truth, to avoid the fear of what it might mean. She hadn't trusted him with it, and in some twisted way, that secrecy had helped pave the road to where she was now. She sat for hours, unmoving, listening to the hum of the city outside her window. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a reminder that danger never slept in Los Angeles. Her mind circled the same haunting question. Can love survive when it's born from lies? The diamond ring still glimmered faintly on her hand. She twisted it around her finger, staring at it as though the answer might appear in its reflection. A part of her longed to believe Chris, that the feelings were real, that his love was more than a cover for a job he never wanted. Another part recoiled at the thought, unable to forgive the deception that had brought them here. When she finally rose, the night was deep. The clock on the wall marked the early hours of morning, yet she had no memory of the hours slipping by. She drifted toward the window, pulling the curtain aside to peer down at the street below. There, on the sidewalk, Chris lingered. He hadn't left. His shoulders were hunched, his hands buried in his jacket pockets, his figure a silhouette under the flickering streetlight. For a long moment, Vanessa watched him, her breath caught in her chest. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze, but made no move to return. Instead, he turned slowly and began to walk down the street, his figure shrinking into the distance until he disappeared around the corner. Vanessa let the curtain fall back into place. Her heart ached with a contradiction she couldn't resolve. Relief that he was gone, grief that he might never come back, and a fragile thread of hope that perhaps he would. She lay awake in bed, staring into the dark, her mind restless. The briefcase was gone. The money was gone. Jason was gone. But the consequences remained, etched into her heart. She wondered if she had learned the right lesson too late. As dawn crept into the sky, painting the city in pale light, Vanessa whispered the words she had avoided for too long. I wanted honesty. From him, from myself. Maybe that's the only way. The words hung in the air, fragile but true. She didn't know if she would ever see Chris again. She didn't know if forgiveness was possible. What she did know was that secrets and lies, no matter how small, no matter how well-intentioned, could destroy everything they touched. For love to survive, it needed truth. And perhaps someday she would find the courage to demand it